She fell in love with a man online, but when she finally met him, she was left speechless. He was hiding a secret that would change her life forever. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Mary Williams's small photography studio in Chicago, illuminating floating particles of dust in the otherwise still air. Mary, a 39-year-old professional photographer, was hunched over her workstation, carefully reviewing the latest set of engagement photographs. Each image displayed an intimate moment of a young couple who radiated joy and anticipation for the life they were about to embark on together. The photos were beautiful, yet Mary couldn't help but feel a pang of longing every time she paused to examine the couple's beaming faces. She brushed a lock of dark hair behind her ear, her expression reflecting a subtle sadness. Outside, car horns echoed from the busy street, while late rush-hour traffic crept along under the orange glow of approaching dusk. Inside her studio, however, time felt suspended, a world contained by the visual stories Mary captured through her lens. She had spent years perfecting her craft, developing a reputation as the go-to photographer for weddings and engagements. While her clients thrilled at her ability to capture warmth in every frame, Mary recognized a quiet irony. She had mastered the art of preserving others' love stories, yet her own personal life remained empty of romance. Rubbing her tired eyes, she tried to focus on the editing software in front of her, but her mind kept drifting to broader questions. Why was it so easy to depict others' happiness, but so difficult to find her own? She thought about the handful of romantic relationships that had come and gone over the years, each fizzling out for reasons that still stung a bit. Some said she was too dedicated to her work. Others claimed she was too cautious, guarding her heart behind the camera instead of stepping in front of life's lens. Her cell phone buzzed against a stack of sample albums. The name Mom illuminated the screen. Mary hesitated, knowing precisely what her mother would say. Even from Florida, where her parents had retired, her mother made it her mission to help Mary find a spouse. For years, her mother had mentioned dating services and blind dates, emphasizing how a woman approaching her 40s couldn't afford to be too picky. The conversation often left Mary feeling defensive and restless, though she understood it came from a place of genuine concern. Letting the phone go to voicemail, Mary continued sifting through the engagement photos. A surge of determination coursed through her as she adjusted color balances and refined lighting. She might not have all the answers for her personal life, but at least her professional world felt within her control. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second reminding her that she had a tight deadline to deliver these edited images by the following morning. Once she finished the final adjustments, she leaned back in her swivel chair, surveying her work. In every photograph, the couple looked as though they were suspended in a perfect moment of promise. Mary smiled at the love shining through their eyes. That intangible glow was something she had yet to experience on her own terms, yet capturing it gave her a sense of vicarious joy. Wiping a smudge off the camera on her desk, she recalled a recent interaction online. She was part of an internet forum for classical music enthusiasts, a place she joined on a whim, hoping to broaden her artistic perspective. There, under the username MaryLens, she posted occasionally about how music could influence her photography. Most comments were polite, if somewhat generic, but there was one member who stood out: Piano Eyes. He had responded to her post about Beethoven's symphonies with a poetic comment describing how he could practically hear colors when a certain melody soared. Mary found his response mesmerizing. They had begun a short exchange of messages, discussing composers and how certain chords seemed to evoke vivid imagery in her photographs. His words were vibrant, full of heartfelt descriptions that spoke to her artistic sensibilities. She'd never seen a photo of him. He claimed to be private about his personal details, but the way he wrote had a certain grace that intrigued her. She had felt a flutter of excitement reading his messages, an unfamiliar feeling she'd tucked away as mere curiosity. The noise from the street outside grew louder, the day's last traces of sunlight slipping behind the skyline. Mary rose, stretching her stiff back, and decided to take a short walk. Stepping onto the sidewalk, she breathed in the cool air, tinged with the scent of roasted coffee wafting from a nearby cafe. The city lights had just started to glow, and she watched people hurrying on their way home. As she walked, Mary recalled the final lines of one of Piano Eyes' messages. "There is music in the everyday hum of life, waiting for us to listen." That perspective resonated with her. She wondered what it would be like to share her world with someone so attuned to life's subtleties. Her mother's concerns aside, was she prepared to open herself to another person's rhythm? The question lingered in her mind, making her heart ache with a new mix of hope and uncertainty. She didn't have the answer yet, but she felt a spark she hadn't recognized before, a sense that something beyond her solitary routine was reaching out, urging her to take a chance. And as Mary stood at the curb, waiting for the light to change, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, like one of her photographs, might be on the verge of capturing a moment that would redefine everything. Mary sat in her living room that evening, the soft glow of a single floor lamp illuminating a cozy space filled with framed photographs of cityscapes and couples, each telling its own story of connection. The hum of the heating unit gave a gentle background noise as she opened her laptop, intent on browsing the classical music forum where she had recently encountered Piano Eyes. For some reason, she found herself more eager than usual to check for new posts. It didn't take long for her to spot a new message from him. He had written a paragraph about a Chopin nocturne, describing how each note cascaded like raindrops in a spring shower. Mary read it twice, absorbing his poetic language. His way of describing music made her wonder if he was a composer or a performer. She typed back a brief reply, asking him about his musical background and how he managed to evoke such vivid imagery in words. Moments later, a notification signaled his response. James, as he casually introduced himself this time, revealed that he was a pianist who performed occasionally in small concert halls. He wrote that every melody painted pictures in his mind, creating landscapes of sound that he tried to convey through descriptive language. Mary's heart quickened at the revelation. This man, whose identity she had only guessed at, was a professional musician with a keen sense for emotion in art. Lost in thought, she glanced around her modestly furnished living room. A plush grey couch faced a TV she rarely turned on, and next to it, an antique record player stood on a wooden stand, a relic from her grandfather. She had grown up listening to old vinyl records of classical pieces. That might have been what led her to join the forum in the first place. A desire to reconnect with her past and infuse her photography with the lush narratives of orchestral music. As she drafted another reply, Mary paused to think about what she could share without seeming too forward. She described how images were her way of capturing fleeting moments, explaining that, in her view, a photograph froze the intangible feelings that might otherwise slip away. She mentioned how the color palette of an image could echo the emotional tone of a musical composition. She pressed send, feeling a pleasant nervousness ripple through her. While she waited, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, her close friend who worked as an event planner. Sarah wanted to know if Mary was up for joining a weekend gathering. Typically, Mary would make an excuse about being busy, but tonight she found herself responding that she might consider it. A part of her realized that she had become too comfortable in her solitary bubble and that maybe she owed it to herself to be more open to new experiences. Returning to her laptop, she saw another message from James. He expressed fascination with the idea of color representing emotion, especially since, as he put it, certain chords triggered strong internal colors for him as well. His words made her smile. It was as though they were discovering a parallel between photography and music that neither had fully articulated before. She found herself wondering about the man behind these eloquent messages, his daily life, his background, his hopes and dreams. They continued chatting for nearly an hour, discussing a range of topics from Baroque composers to modern jazz influences. James mentioned practicing at a small theater in downtown Chicago for an upcoming performance. He also spoke of a deep, personal connection to the piano. He described how the gentle press of each key and the resonating vibration of the strings felt like an extension of his own voice. Mary, enthralled, revealed bits about her photography business, the couples she photographed, and the lingering sadness of constantly documenting love stories she never got to star in. At one point, Mary hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She was tempted to ask for a photo of him or suggest a video call, but something held her back. Perhaps the fear of breaking the magic of their current connection, or maybe just concern about moving too fast. Instead, she typed a simple question. Would you like to continue sharing thoughts about music and images? I feel like there's so much more to explore. His answer came quickly. Absolutely. There is a certain harmony in how you perceive the world through your lens, and I'd like to learn more. Let's keep talking. Perhaps one day we'll meet in person. Mary felt a lightness in her chest, an unfamiliar sense of possibility blooming. She closed her laptop and leaned against the cushions, her mind filled with the echoes of his descriptions. She couldn't recall the last time she had felt such a genuine pull toward anyone, especially someone she'd never met face to face. As she tucked her feet under a soft blanket, she realized she was smiling, a small but significant sign that something in her life was beginning to change. The faint glow of early morning crept through Mary's curtains as she awakened from a restless sleep. Though she'd gone to bed with a spark of excitement the night before, it seemed her dreams had been peppered with uneasy scenes of relationships gone sour. She sat up, massaging her temples, and tried to banish the images of former heartbreaks that still floated in her subconscious. Pulling on a comfortable sweatshirt, Mary made her way to the kitchen to brew coffee. The city outside was just coming to life, car engines revving, deliveries happening, the bustle of a weekday routine. She glanced at her phone, half expecting to see a new message from James, but there was nothing yet. A slight twinge of disappointment surprised her. She realized she was already growing attached to his presence, even if it was only through text messages. As she sipped her coffee, she allowed her mind to wander back through past relationships. There had been a few, mostly long-distance connections she had formed online. One man had seemed kind and artistic at first, but he vanished without explanation, leaving her with a sense of betrayal and wariness. Another had seemed promising in person, until his controlling nature revealed itself. Those experiences had made Mary more guarded, reluctant to invest hope in someone too quickly. She carried her mug to the living room, setting it on a coaster near her laptop. A notification blinked for the Classical Music Forum, but it was just a general announcement about an upcoming online recital. Instead, Mary opened her editing software, deciding to distract herself by working on some photos from a recent engagement shoot. The images were bright and romantic, giggles shared, hands clasped, eyes shining. Yet she found herself dwelling on whether such happiness was truly sustainable. After an hour of focused work, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Mom. Mary exhaled, already bracing herself. She picked up, trying to sound cheerful. "Hello, Mom. How's Florida today?" Mary asked, swirling her mug between her palms. Her mother launched into a breathless update about the local community events and how Mary's father had joined a seniors fishing club. Then came the inevitable. "So, Mary, have you thought about that singles cruise I mentioned? It could be fun, and you might meet a nice gentleman." Mary grimaced. "Mom, I appreciate your concern, but I'm doing fine right now. Work is busy. Besides, Her mother cut in with a gentle but insistent tone. "I just want you to be happy. You know, you're almost 40. It's natural for a mother to worry when her daughter seems so alone." The words stung. Mary bit her lip and forced a light laugh. "I'm not alone. I have friends, and I'm doing some new things. I promise, if there's something to tell, I'll tell you." They ended the call amicably, but Mary felt the familiar weight of expectations settle on her. She knew her mother's concerns weren't entirely misplaced. She had, after all, avoided serious commitments since her earlier disappointments. Yet she bristled at the notion that her life had to follow a specific timeline. With a sigh, she checked her messages and saw a note from Sarah asking if she would be free to meet for lunch. Grateful for the distraction, Mary agreed. She dressed quickly in a casual outfit, pulling her hair into a loose ponytail, and left her apartment. When she arrived at the cafe, Sarah was already seated at a window table, scrolling through her phone. Sarah looked up with a grin. "Hey, stranger, glad you could make it." She was 42, recently divorced, and juggling life with a teenage son. Yet she always seemed to radiate an air of confident curiosity about the world. They ordered sandwiches and started chatting. Eventually, Sarah leaned forward, voice lowered conspiratorially. "So, spill it. You look different, like you've been lit up from the inside. Did something happen?" Mary hesitated, then relayed the basics of her recent conversations with James. She admitted that she felt both excited and scared, especially with her history of online connections turning sour. Sarah listened intently, nodding with understanding. "I get it," she said softly. "It's hard to dive in when you've been burned before, but you never know when something good might come along. Sounds like he's already sparked your imagination." Mary tapped her fingers on the table. "That's exactly it. I feel this pull, but then all my old doubts come rushing in." Sarah reached across, giving Mary's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Let those doubts exist, but don't let them control you. You owe it to yourself to at least see where this goes." Mary felt a measure of comfort in her friend's words. Still, as she walked back home that afternoon, her mind flickered between hope and caution. Her past weighed on her like a subtle anchor, yet she couldn't help but sense that a new wind was pushing her forward. What remained to be seen was whether she'd find the courage to lift that anchor entirely and set sail toward unknown horizons. That evening, Mary found herself seated in front of her laptop once again, reading through a lengthy message James had sent while she was out with Sarah. He described a recent rehearsal, explaining how the resonance of the piano made him think of human voices in choir, each note standing alone, yet blending into a collective harmony. His words carried a vividness that both mesmerized and unsettled Mary, because she felt a growing attachment to someone she had never met in person. Deciding to push past her hesitation, she typed a thoughtful response, asking him about how he first fell in love with piano and what his favorite pieces were to play. She also mentioned a bit about her own process as a photographer, how she spent hours in solitude editing, and how sometimes the right musical piece could break through her creative blocks. When she hit send, a wave of anxiety washed over her. Was she sharing too much? Was she sounding desperate, shaking off the notion? She reminded herself that genuine connections often required a degree of vulnerability. She busied herself by scrolling through previous photo shoots, reorganizing them into digital folders. Yet her focus kept drifting back to the conversation she was forging with James. A few minutes later, a new notification popped up. James responded with unexpected openness. He'd started playing piano as a young child, drawn not just by the sound, but by the tactile sensation of pressing the keys and feeling them respond. Music, he said, was like a second language, one that allowed emotions to flow directly from his heart, without the barrier of words. Mary felt her chest tighten at the depth he conveyed. She understood that longing to express what lay beneath the surface. It was nearly midnight when Mary finally decided to close her laptop. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't stop mulling over the question that had been growing in her mind. Was it time to meet James face to face? Or would that risk shattering the beautiful mystery they had cultivated so far? The uncertainty lingered, but her gut told her that she couldn't remain in a virtual space forever. The next morning, she woke to the ring of her door buzzer. Opening it, she found a delivery person holding a small package. Confused, Mary signed for it. Inside was a simple silver charm in the shape of a treble clef, along with a short note. "Thank you for reminding me how powerful art can be, James." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had given her a gift so personal in a very long time. She carefully turned the charm in her hand, noticing the delicate details. Her mind raced with questions. How did he get her address? She realized she had shared her studio location in a previous conversation about business. Yet the fact that he took the effort to send this thoughtful token both warmed her and stirred a quiet caution. Gifts could signal intimacy, but they could also signal a deeper emotional entanglement. Was she ready for that? Clipping the charm onto a thin chain she owned, Mary decided to wear it that day. She stepped outside into the crisp morning air and took a ride downtown to visit a small gallery featuring an exhibit by local photographers. She thought examining someone else's work might offer fresh inspiration or at least distract her from the flutter of emotions swirling inside her. Walking through the gallery's bright white corridors, Mary admired images that captured urban life. People on subways, empty alleys at dusk, and storefronts glimmering with neon signs. Yet her mind kept flickering back to James's note, to the sensation of his presence that seemed to be following her. As she moved to a quieter side of the exhibit, her phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "I hope the little gift brightened your morning. I'd love to know your reaction, but only if you're comfortable sharing." She felt a small thrill seeing his name on her screen. Before she could second-guess herself, she texted back, "It did brighten my morning, thank you. It's beautiful. Maybe we should find a time to actually meet. I'm curious to see if our in-person selves align with our messages." She paused, heart pounding. It was the first time she'd broached the subject of meeting face-to-face directly. Rather than feeling dread, she was surprised by a trembling excitement. The echo of James's piano stories lingered in her thoughts, and she wondered if there was something more he had yet to reveal about himself. Despite the flutter of nerves, a part of her was certain that facing reality, whatever it might be, was better than staying in the half-light of possibility. Mary spent the next few days juggling her regular photography work, with a tingling anticipation that she could barely keep under control. The online conversations with James had become a nightly ritual, and each new message strengthened her resolve to meet him in person. They discussed everything from Chopin to Gershwin, from the complexity of black and white photography to the allure of vibrant color. Often, James would share anecdotes about the small theater where he practiced, describing the acoustics and the feeling of the smooth piano keys under his fingertips. Finally, a message arrived that made Mary's heart skip a beat. "I'd be honored if you'd like to drop by the theater during one of my rehearsals. It's not a grand hall, but it's home to me. Maybe after we could grab coffee. I'd love to hear how you experience music behind the camera lens." Mary's fingers trembled as she replied, accepting the invitation. She pictured stepping into the theater with her camera bag, watching James at the piano, capturing the moment in her photographs. She couldn't ignore a slight undertone of apprehension, the inevitable worry that reality might clash with her romanticized notion of him. Yet her excitement overshadowed her doubts. She planned meticulously, deciding to bring not just her everyday camera, but also a special lens she reserved for intimate portrait shots. The night before the scheduled visit, Mary found herself tossing in bed. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined the scene: James, a kind expression on his face, possibly smiling as she walked in. She caught herself rehearsing introductions in her head, only to feel a rush of embarrassment. Reminding herself that nervousness was natural, she finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Morning came, and Mary gave herself ample time to get ready. She dressed in a comfortable yet flattering outfit, a soft sweater paired with dark jeans, and tied her hair in a loose braid. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked uncertain but also determined, a subtle glow of hope in her eyes. Despite her earlier attempts to brush off her mother's comments, she did feel a pang that her parents always believed she was missing out on life. Maybe, if this meeting went well, she'd have happier news to share soon. As she arrived downtown, she recognized the aging facade of the small theater James had mentioned. The building's old brick exterior and modest marquee exuded a certain charm, a reminder of a time when intimate venues thrived on local talent. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the lobby doors, the faint scent of dust and wood varnish enveloping her. She paused in the dimly lit entryway, scanning the open double doors leading to the auditorium. From somewhere inside, she heard the reverberation of a piano chord echo through the space. It was a warm, resonant sound, followed by a brief pause, then another chord. Soft notes began to form a gentle melody, filling the air with an undercurrent of longing and promise. Mary inhaled deeply, feeling a swirl of emotions. She steadied herself and walked toward the stage. In the pool of light cast by a single overhead lamp, she saw a figure seated at the piano, his posture upright, hands hovering over the keys with practiced elegance. He wore a simple black sweater and slacks, and as Mary approached the stage, he seemed lost in the music, unaware of her presence. Her camera, slung around her neck, felt heavier than usual. She lifted it, adjusting the focus to capture the man and the gleaming piano beneath the gentle spotlight. The piece ended with a final, lingering note. Mary could almost feel the vibration humming through the wooden floor. She took a cautious step forward, her voice caught in her throat. In that instant, James turned his head in her direction, as though sensing her arrival. His expression was calm, and a faint smile lit his face. "Mary?" he asked softly, his voice echoing in the stillness. She nodded, realizing he might not see the movement. Gathering her courage, she forced herself to speak. "Yes, I'm here. It's wonderful to finally meet you." He stood slowly, the bench scraping the floor. Mary's pulse raced as she moved closer, her camera still held in one hand. Looking at him this close, she noted subtle details, the graceful line of his jaw, the warm tone of his skin, the quiet confidence in his stance. Yet, in the spotlight's glow, she noticed something else, a certain stillness in his gaze, as though it was fixed not on her, but at a point beyond her. Her breath caught, realization dawning. He did not reach out to shake her hand, but instead carefully placed his fingertips along the edge of the piano, as if navigating by touch. The weight of the moment pressed on her. She recalled all their talks about photography, color, and visual beauty. Now, Faced with James's calm presence, she understood that all those descriptions had come from a man who had never seen a single photograph in his life. Mary's thoughts swirled, her heart pounding. She struggled to form a response, her mind teetering between fascination and confusion. In that silent second, she grasped that every conversation they'd had was about to take on a wholly different meaning, and she braced herself to step into a world she realized she knew very little about. End of Act 1. Awaiting confirmation to proceed with the next acts. Acto 2, Chapter 6. A Mentor's Insight. Approx. 780 words. Mary sat in the theater's small backstage lounge, her camera resting on her lap. The air still carried the faint echo of James's piano performance and the aftershock of her realization that he was blind. Though she had managed to find her voice and exchange a few words with him, the whirlwind of emotions in her heart left her feeling unsteady. She was scheduled for another photo shoot that afternoon, but all she could think about was James, how he had opened a new world of possibilities and, simultaneously, revealed how little she actually knew. To gather her thoughts, she decided to make an impromptu visit to Candice Palmer, her longtime mentor and friend, who was also the editor-in-chief of a renowned photography magazine. Candice, at 55, had a reserved manner that often camouflaged her warm heart. She had guided Mary through the early stages of her career, offering both technical advice and personal encouragement. If there was anyone who could help Mary navigate her current confusion, it was Candice. That afternoon, Mary walked into Candice's corner office in a modest mid-rise building overlooking the Chicago River. The office was neat, but bursting with creative energy. Walls adorned with striking photography, books stacked in corners, and a large wooden desk in the middle. Candice was on the phone, gesturing for Mary to sit. Once she ended the call, she welcomed Mary with a curious smile. "What brings you here without an appointment?" Candice asked, pushing aside a binder of proofs. Mary let out a small, shaky laugh. "I hope you don't mind. I just needed to talk. Something unexpected happened." Without pressing for details, Candice poured them both coffee from a small machine on a side table. Mary explained the entire story, from meeting James online to discovering he was blind. She described how conflicted she felt, awed by his perspective on music, yet unsure how to reconcile his world with her passion for capturing images he had never seen. The words tumbled out, sounding almost surreal to her own ears. Candice listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding. When Mary finished, Candice set her mug down and pressed her fingertips together, an expression of deep contemplation on her face. "He sounds extraordinary," she finally said. "And you sound captivated. That's not a state I've seen you in for a very long time." Mary glanced at the half-drunk coffee in her cup. "He is extraordinary. But what if I'm overcomplicating my life? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to share photography with a man who can't see. I feel guilty for being surprised and for not knowing how to include him in my visual world." Candice stood up, walking over to a photo on the wall, a black and white portrait of an elderly couple holding hands. "Early in my career, I captured this image in a bustling train station. They never noticed me, never posed, but I still believe this photograph carries a silent poetry. It reminds me that art isn't always about what we see, it's about what we sense, the emotion in a moment." Mary studied the image. She remembered the story behind it. Candice had traveled across the country to photograph everyday human connections. This particular shot became an emblem of timeless devotion. "I know that. I feel that every time I take a picture," Mary admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to convey that to James. That's where your creativity comes in, Candice said gently. You mentioned how James describes music in a tactile and emotional way. Maybe there's a similar approach for photography. Be open, and you might discover new techniques to share what you see with him. Mary's mind swirled with possibilities she hadn't considered. She realized she'd been thinking in terms of traditional sight, forgetting that the essence of her art could be communicated through other senses or through carefully chosen words and stories. Candice was right. The heart of photography, like music, was feeling. Taking a slow breath, Mary nodded. I want to try. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I can't ignore this chance. Candice offered a reassuring smile. You've always been talented, Mary, but I see a new spark in you, one that goes beyond technique. Trust that instinct. Also, don't overlook your own needs. Fear can be a powerful motivator or a paralyzing force. Choose wisely which role you let it play. They spent the next half hour brainstorming ideas, such as creating tactile photo albums with raised outlines or describing each photograph's atmosphere. It sounded experimental, even a bit daunting, but Mary felt a surge of excitement as she imagined bridging her world of visuals with James's world of sound and touch. Before parting, Candice reached out and squeezed Mary's hand. Keep me updated, all right? And remember, sometimes the right people come into our lives to broaden our horizons in ways we never knew were possible. Don't let self-doubt rob you of discovering something beautiful. Mary left the office feeling a cautious optimism. She still had questions, countless in fact, but at least now she also had direction. Candice had offered more than advice. She had shone a light on a path Mary hadn't seen before. As Mary stepped onto the bustling street, she clutched the camera strap around her shoulder, letting the city's noises blend with her own determination to move forward, one step at a time. 2 days passed in a whirlwind of photo sessions and editing deadlines, yet Mary's thoughts were never far from James. They had exchanged a few messages since their meeting, but neither had directly addressed the emotional undercurrent of their encounter. Their conversations remained comfortable, discussing upcoming concerts, the nuances of Beethoven's later sonatas, and Mary's latest wedding shoot. But a deeper question hung in the air. How would they move forward? On a chilly Friday evening, Mary found herself standing in her apartment, staring at the phone in her hand. Her reflection in the living room mirror showed a woman who looked both excited and nervous. Sarah had invited her to a small get-together at a local jazz club, suggesting that Mary needed a night out to clear her head. But Mary knew she wanted to talk to James before she decided on any social distraction. She dialed his number, heart thumping loudly. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm. "Mary, it's good to hear from you. How have you been?" "Busy," she replied with a soft laugh. I wanted to call because I feel like we didn't really talk about what happened at the theater. I sort of rushed away afterward." There was a brief pause before James spoke again. "I noticed you seemed a bit startled when you saw me by the piano. I suppose it's natural. Sometimes people don't realize right away that I'm blind." Mary closed her eyes, wishing she had a better response. "I'm sorry if I seemed rude or unprepared. I should have realized it sooner or asked more direct questions. We talked so much about photography and colors, I just assumed." "I understand," James said gently. "To be honest, I love hearing people describe the visual world. It helps me see in my own way. I never intended to hide anything. I just didn't want my blindness to be the first thing people knew about me. Usually, it changes their perceptions." Mary sensed the vulnerability in his tone. "I get it. I hope you know it doesn't change how much I appreciate our conversations. Actually, it might make them even richer." James let out a quiet chuckle, a mixture of relief and warmth. "I'm glad to hear that. So, how are we moving forward?" She exhaled slowly, recalling Candace's words about creativity and open-mindedness. I'd like to keep exploring the connection between music and photography, if you're willing. Maybe we can figure out ways for you to experience my photos. I've been brainstorming ideas, like describing the textures of what I capture, or maybe using some tactile methods. That sounds fascinating, James replied. I'd love to try. There's a piece I'm rehearsing for next week's performance, and it's got this incredibly intricate structure. Perhaps you can photograph me practicing, and we can talk about what you see and what I feel. Mary's heart fluttered. This was exactly the step she'd been hoping they would take. They agreed to meet the following afternoon at the theatre for a more focused, collaborative session. After hanging up, Mary leaned against her couch, a grin playing on her lips. She could almost feel her world expanding, as though she were stepping onto unfamiliar ground with a sense of tentative wonder. That night, she reluctantly accepted Sarah's invitation to the jazz club, partly to distract herself from overthinking. The club was a dimly lit venue with exposed brick walls and vintage posters of past jazz legends. The low murmur of conversation blended with the smoky notes of a saxophone warming up on stage. Mary found Sarah at a small table near the back, sipping a cocktail. Sarah eyed Mary curiously. You look happier than you did last week. Did something good happen? Mary shrugged, trying to appear casual. I talked to James again. We're going to work together tomorrow on a photography meets music experiment. Sarah's eyes lit up. That's fantastic, but you still seem nervous. I am, Mary admitted. I feel like I'm leaving my comfort zone. It's one thing to have a theoretical conversation, but actually collaborating is different. What if I mess up? What if he finds my descriptions lacking? Sarah reached across the table and gave Mary's hand a gentle squeeze. You'll never know until you try. Besides, it sounds like he's genuinely open to your ideas. Don't undermine yourself. You've always excelled when you follow your intuition. Mary smiled, reminded yet again how lucky she was to have a friend like Sarah. She ordered a drink, allowing the smooth rhythms of jazz to wash over her. The music had a way of softening her worries, at least for a while. But in the back of her mind, she kept imagining the moment she'd set up her camera the next day, the lens trained on James as he poured his soul into the piano. Long after she left the jazz club, Mary lay in bed, the faint ring of saxophone melodies echoing in her mind. She understood she was saying goodbye to the safety of her old routine and stepping into something more uncertain. Yet, as dawn approached, she realized she was okay with that. In fact, she was more than okay. She was ready. Sunlight glinted off Mary's camera lens as she walked into the theater lobby. The same creaking floors and subtle mustiness greeted her, but this time she felt a heightened sense of purpose. Instead of simply watching James from afar, she was determined to document the nuance of his rehearsal and then translate those visuals into a sensory language they could share. She found James on stage, adjusting the height of the piano bench. He wore a casual outfit, dark slacks and a grey sweater, and his posture was relaxed, yet focused. Upon hearing her footsteps, he turned his head in her direction, offering a welcoming smile. "Mary," he said, "good to have you here." She approached the piano and carefully set her camera bag on the floor. "I'm glad to be here. You have no idea how many ideas have been bouncing around in my head." He chuckled. "I'm looking forward to hearing them. But first, let's start simple. I'll play a piece, and you capture what you feel is important. Then, we'll talk about it." Mary nodded, pulling out her DSLR. She watched James's fingers hover lightly above the keys, as though seeking a precise point to begin. The moment he pressed down the first chord, the notes cascaded through the auditorium, filling the space with an evocative melody. Mary felt her breath catch at the sheer emotional clarity of his performance. It was one thing to listen to a recording, but being in the same room where the music was created felt almost sacred. She began taking photos, focusing on the tension in James's hands, the reflective sheen on the piano, the subtle arch of his back. With each click of the shutter, she tried to capture the flow of energy between James and the instrument. Occasionally, she moved around to get different angles, a close-up of his face as he tilted his head slightly in concentration, a wide shot that encompassed the empty rows of seats behind him. There was a mesmerizing quality to the way he sank into the music, unguarded and completely immersed. When he finished, a faint echo seemed to linger in the air. Mary lowered her camera and let the silence settle before speaking. That was incredible. Even from a technical standpoint, every note felt precise, but there was this deep undercurrent of emotion. James smiled, reaching out to the edge of the piano to orient himself. "I've played that piece 1,000 times, but it never feels exactly the same. The piano responds to my mood, my energy, even the temperature of the room. Music is an evolving conversation between me and these keys." Mary crouched beside the piano, flipping through some of the images on her camera's display. "I tried to capture that conversation, the subtle changes in your hands, the reflection on the piano's glossy surface. I even got a shot of the worn carpet under your foot on the pedal. It looked like it had seen years of dedication." He raised an eyebrow. "I like that you noticed the details most people would overlook. Can you describe some of the photos to me? Maybe start with one you find most compelling." She settled on a shot that showed James leaning forward, his right hand striking a chord while his left hovered just above the keys. The lighting overhead bathed half his face in soft shadow. "In this photo," Mary began, her voice measured, "you're almost smiling, like you've just found the precise note you were searching for. The piano lid is lifted, reflecting a hazy outline of your profile. Your sweater's sleeves are slightly rolled up, and you can see the tension in your forearm. It's like a moment of discovery, where everything else falls away except you and that chord." James listened intently, an appreciative expression on his face. "I can imagine it. Thank you. That's exactly the kind of detail that helps me form a mental picture." "Keep going." She described 2 more photos, noting how the wooden stage around him seemed to glow from the overhead light, and how the edges of the piano caught random glints that accentuated its curves. James asked questions about angles, colors, and even the background, which made Mary realize how nuanced a visual scene could be when someone couldn't see it for themselves. Through each description, she felt them forging a shared language that transcended her camera's viewfinder and his visual limitation. They spent the rest of the afternoon in a similar rhythm. James played, Mary captured images, and then they talked about each frame, exploring ways to convey their mutual understanding. By the time they took a break, both were brimming with new insights. Stepping off the stage, Mary felt a thrill course through her. The special world she had entered was not purely visual or auditory. It was a realm where emotion, imagination, and trust converged, forging a deeper bond with each passing moment. A few days later, Mary found herself at home, meticulously editing the photos she'd taken of James. She usually approached editing by focusing on color correction, lighting balance, and composition. This time, however, she felt compelled to consider how James might interpret each image if he couldn't see it. The question weighed on her in a surprisingly creative way, prompting her to write detailed notes on each photo. She'd note things like a wide shot of James at the piano, the stage lighting casting long shadows, emphasizing the emptiness of the auditorium, perhaps representing his focused world. Then she'd add an emotional layer. The angle suggests a subtle loneliness, as though the music is what connects him to an otherwise vacant space. In the midst of her work, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Sarah's name appeared, and Mary quickly answered. "Hey, Sarah," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Hey, you, how are things going with the musical genius?" Sarah's teasing tone made Mary smile. "Good, I think. We did a collaborative session. He played, I photographed. We're trying to figure out how to translate those images for him." Sarah whistled softly. "I can't imagine how that works, but it sounds like you're both finding your way." "You must be learning a lot." Mary turned her gaze to the window, watching the city skyline. "I am. It's like I'm rewriting the rules of how I approach photography. It's challenging, but in a good way." They chatted about everyday matters for a bit. Sarah's teenage son wanting to attend a music festival, a potential trip Mary had planned to see her parents in Florida. Eventually, Sarah lowered her voice, sounding more serious. "So, are you actually letting yourself fall for this guy, or are you still holding back?" The question caught Mary off guard. She paused, then spoke quietly. "I'm drawn to him, more than I've been drawn to anyone in a long time. But I'm not sure if that's just because it's new and different. I have these moments of doubt, like, do we belong in the same world? My entire career is visual, and James experiences everything through sound and touch." Sarah's response was immediate. "Listen, I can't pretend to know exactly how you feel, but if you ask me, this isn't just about sight or no sight. It's about two people connecting on a deeper level. Don't let the differences scare you off. You both seem willing to bridge the gap." Mary felt a wave of gratitude for her friend's insight. After they ended the call, she returned to her editing with renewed focus, adding final touches to each image and finalizing the descriptive notes. When she was done, she decided to email some of the pictures to James, pairing them with her written explanations. She wanted to see if the words alone could convey at least a fraction of the imagery. The next evening, James called her, voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Mary, those descriptions were amazing. It was almost like hearing a story. In one of them, where you said the spotlight on the piano looked like a halo of light, I actually felt the warmth of that circle in my imagination." She grinned, a sense of relief washing over her. "I'm so glad it helped. I was worried it might feel forced." "Not at all. In fact, I'd like to expand on this idea. Maybe we could present a joint piece, an exhibit or a performance, where we combine your photographs with my music. We could craft an experience for both sighted and visually impaired audiences, where the descriptions and the sounds guide everyone." Mary was momentarily speechless. An exhibit or performance? The notion felt ambitious. She had done gallery showings before, but never anything that integrated live music or took accessibility so deeply into account. Yet the challenge excited her. "That's a bold idea," she finally said, her voice tinged with anticipation. "And I love it." They spent an hour tossing around concepts. James suggested an intimate venue, maybe a local art space or even a section of the theater. Mary brainstormed how to present her images in a tactile, friendly way, maybe braille captions or textured prints. With each passing minute, she felt herself adjusting more comfortably to these new rules of collaboration, where she wasn't just the lone photographer behind the camera, but part of a creative duo determined to push boundaries. By the time they said goodnight, Mary realized how far she'd come from the cautious woman who initially hesitated to respond to James's online messages. She was stepping into unknown territory with every conversation, but each step felt purposeful, as though she was finally aligned with the kind of art and the kind of connection she'd been yearning for all along. A week later, Mary walked into the small auditorium where James often rehearsed, but this time the space was buzzing with activity. Several musicians had gathered, string players tuning violins, a flutist running scales, a stagehand adjusting the overhead lights. A sense of camaraderie filled the air, a marked contrast to the more solitary sessions Mary had witnessed before. She spotted James talking to a tall, middle-aged man with a friendly smile. The man looked up and waved her over. "You must be Mary. I'm Daniel Brooks, one of the violinists here. James has told me a lot about you and your work." His voice carried a warmth that put Mary at ease. James, sensing Mary's presence, turned his head in her direction. "Hey, Mary. Glad you made it. Daniel has been curious to meet the photographer who's gotten me so excited about new projects." Mary laughed softly. "Well, that's flattering. I'm still learning a lot about this new dimension of artistic collaboration. It's nice to meet you, Daniel." Daniel wiped rosin dust from his fingers. "James tells me you're exploring ways to bridge music and photography, especially for those who can't see. I think it's a remarkable idea. I had an accident a few years back and lost the use of my right hand for a while. The emotional toll was huge, and it made me realize how fragile our abilities can be. Creativity can help us adapt, but not everyone believes that until they see it." Mary nodded empathetically. "I'm learning that firsthand. James has opened my eyes, no pun intended, to how art isn't limited by conventional senses." Daniel smiled, then excused himself to get ready for the day's rehearsal. As Mary turned, she noticed another musician, a young flautist named Fiona, sorting through sheet music at a nearby chair. Her curly hair bounced with each movement, and she seemed energetic. Spotting Mary, she stood up. "You must be the photographer," Fiona greeted, extending her hand. "James can't stop talking about how you're combining visuals with tactile descriptions. He's always been a mentor to me, helped me gain confidence in interpreting pieces. So I'm thrilled he's found someone who understands the power of art beyond just performance." Mary felt a pleasant flutter in her stomach. These strangers were welcoming her as if she were already part of their community. She realized how integral James was to this network of musicians. She pictured him coaching them, sharing insights that transcended visual limitations. A surge of admiration welled up inside her. "I'm still figuring it all out," Mary replied, "but I appreciate the encouragement. It's not every day you find a group so open to experimentation." Fiona nodded. "We've all been touched by James's unique perspective. He doesn't just play music, he feels it. It's contagious. So if you ever need help with your exhibit or ideas, let us know. We might even collaborate on the musical side." Soon, the rehearsal began, and Mary seated herself a few rows back to observe. The orchestra's collective sound filled the auditorium, a tapestry of strings, woodwinds, and piano. James's piano stood out with its rich, resonant chords, weaving in and out of the ensemble. Mary snapped a few photos, aiming to capture the dynamic interplay between the musicians. She found herself drawn to expressions of concentration, the interplay of bows on strings, the hush right before a crescendo. During a brief intermission, Mary joined James and Daniel in the corridor. The conversation turned to the possibility of an event that merged Mary's photographic exhibit with a live performance by James and a few fellow musicians. Daniel seemed enthusiastic, floating ideas on potential venues. "I know a small gallery that sometimes hosts intimate concerts. It's not fancy, but the vibe is perfect for something experimental." James liked the idea. "We can use minimal lighting, highlight the photos on display, and have interactive stations where visitors can feel textures or read braille descriptions." Mary felt an excited knot in her chest. "It's ambitious, but if everyone is up for it, I'm in. I've never curated an exhibit that went beyond just hanging photos on walls. This could be the first of its kind for me." They chatted specifics until the conductor called them back to resume rehearsal. As Mary watched them walk away, she couldn't help but reflect on how she'd stumbled into a circle of people who understood the deeper currents of art and inclusion. She remembered her initial reluctance to even respond to James online. And now here she was, forging alliances with individuals who genuinely believed in her vision and in the synergy she and James could create. Though she couldn't see the full path ahead, the kindness and enthusiasm of these new allies propelled her forward. She left the rehearsal that day with a sense of purpose that felt stronger than ever, her thoughts already churning with plans, sketches, and the hum of musical notes replaying in her mind. Early the next morning, Mary arrived at her photography studio to review images from the previous day's rehearsal. She was sorting through shots of Daniel's intense expression as he played violin, Fiona's poised flute solos, and James's focused stance at the piano. The pictures radiated a sense of unity among the musicians, which fed Mary's optimism about their upcoming collaboration. But just as she was applying a filter to enhance the color contrast, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Puzzled, she answered, and a clipped male voice spoke. "Hello, is this Mary Williams? My name is George Evans. I'm one of the sponsors for the theater's upcoming recitals." Mary's heartbeat quickened. "Yes, this is Mary. How can I help you?" "I understand you've been discussing some inclusive event with James Adams. He's requested time on the schedule and certain modifications. I wanted to clarify a few things. We have a strict budget, and I need to ensure any proposed activity aligns with our financial and audience expectations." The authoritative tone unsettled Mary. "Of course, we're still in the early planning stages, but we envision a small-scale concert combined with a photo exhibit that accommodates visually impaired guests, nothing excessively large." George's sigh crackled through the phone. "Look, Ms. Williams, we appreciate James's talent, but the sponsors primarily back performances that attract sizable paying audiences. A specialized event focusing on, the visually impaired might not be as lucrative. Do you see what I'm getting at?" Mary's stomach churned at his implication. She tightened her grip on the phone. "Mr. Evans, I believe art should be accessible to everyone, including those who can't see. Also, it's not just about them. It's about bridging experiences for people of all abilities." George sounded less than convinced. "I'm just saying, we can't afford to waste resources on an event that doesn't pull in a strong crowd. I know James can deliver an amazing performance, but if you complicate it with these extra accommodations, we risk diminishing returns. It's business, Ms. Williams." Mary sensed her frustration rising. "I understand the business aspect, but James is more than capable of drawing an audience. His skill speaks for itself. And if making the event inclusive costs a bit more, maybe it's an investment in a broader, more meaningful purpose." George exhaled loudly. "I hope you're right, because if this flops, it's on you and James. The theater can't keep funneling money into niche programs. Keep that in mind. Good day." The line went dead. She stared at the phone, a heaviness settling over her. This was the first overt pushback she had encountered regarding their project. Though she knew not everyone would share her passion, the stark reality of financial concerns and potential bias made her feel defensive and worried. If the sponsor decided to withhold funds, it could jeopardize the event and James's standing at the theater. Needing clarity, she called James and relayed the conversation. He was quiet for a moment. "I've dealt with that attitude before," he admitted. "Many see accommodations as a burden rather than an opportunity." Mary's voice faltered. "But you have a right to a stage that accepts your approach. You've worked so hard for this. We both have." James's resolve came through the phone. "We won't be deterred. Let's keep pushing forward." Maybe we can reach out to alternate sponsors or use a smaller venue that's more open to inclusive ideas. I'm not giving up on this. His confidence bolstered Mary. I agree, we can look for alternative funding or scale back if necessary, but I hate the thought of them belittling the value of what we're trying to do. They ended the call with a plan to regroup and explore other options. Yet Mary couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that their road would be bumpier than she'd imagined. That evening, she met Sarah for a quick coffee, needing a friend's perspective. Sarah listened intently, sipping her latte. I'm not surprised. People often talk about inclusion until it challenges the budget or mainstream preferences. Doesn't make it right, but it happens. Mary rubbed her temples. I can handle artistic criticism, but the idea that sponsors see this as a waste of money feels so wrong. James deserves better. He does, Sarah agreed, and you do too. But maybe adversity will bring out your best work. Think about how you can pitch the event so it highlights benefits to the community. Make sponsors see there's an audience hungry for something new and meaningful. Mary nodded, already formulating how she and James could present a compelling case. She would gather testimonials, highlight James's following, emphasize the educational aspect of an inclusive exhibit. If the main sponsor remained reluctant, perhaps there were private donors or grants aimed at accessible arts programs. Still, as she returned to her studio that night, Mary felt a weight pressing against her renewed sense of purpose. She turned on her computer, looking over the carefully edited photos of James and his fellow musicians. Their passion was tangible, shining through each frame. She refused to let narrow-minded objections from a sponsor derail that spirit. Determined, she drafted emails to a few contacts Candice had shared with her, people in the local arts community who might champion inclusive projects. As her fingers flew over the keyboard, she steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Conflict, she realized, was inevitable on any transformative journey. Yet she also believed it was precisely that friction which could forge a deeper resilience, both in her art and in her commitment to James. Sunlight glimmered through the tall windows of Mary's studio as she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by printouts of her latest photographs. She'd been up half the night refining concepts for the upcoming inclusive event. Although the sponsor's skepticism weighed on her mind, she felt more determined than ever to see the project through. She carefully labeled each print with a short description to help James form a mental image of her intended layout. Her phone buzzed on a nearby table. It was a text from James. Morning practice just ended. Got some news. Meet me at the cafe near the theater if you can. Reading his words, Mary felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She gathered her prints into a tidy pile, shoved them into a protective case, and grabbed her coat before heading out. The cafe, a cozy nook with exposed brick walls and warm lighting, was fairly empty when she arrived. James was seated at a corner table, his cane leaning against the chair. A half-finished cappuccino rested in front of him, and he looked thoughtful, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as if playing an invisible keyboard. "Hey," Mary said softly, sitting across from him. "You sounded a bit urgent." He tilted his head with a welcoming smile. "I hope I didn't worry you. I just wanted to share something. I spoke to another potential sponsor, an arts foundation that supports inclusive projects. They're intrigued, but they need a solid plan and timeline. So that's good news, right?" Mary exhaled, relief softening her tense shoulders. "That's fantastic. The timeline part we can handle. I've been working on the event structure, especially the photo exhibit portion. It'll need describing text or possibly even braille panels next to each image." "We'll have to budget carefully," James nodded. "Yes, we'll have to be methodical about it, but at least we're not stuck with people who only see this as an unprofitable venture. This foundation might offer a grant if we meet their criteria." They spent the next hour exchanging ideas, making notes on napkins. Mary showed him small prints from her case, describing each picture in detail while James traced their edges. Occasionally, the murmur of other customers and the hiss of the espresso machine would momentarily distract them, but they were quick to refocus. The synergy was palpable. Every time Mary grew cautious about logistics, James brought a renewed sense of optimism. A vibration from Mary's phone interrupted their flow. She glanced at the screen to see a message from her mother. "When are you coming to Florida? We miss you." Mary felt a pang of guilt. She had promised to visit her parents soon, but with the event preparations, she kept postponing the trip. She decided to reply later, not wanting to dampen the positive momentum she and James were riding. After packing up, they walked to the theater together. The crisp Chicago wind whipped around them, but James's grip on her arm was light, a sign of his confidence navigating the city streets. When they arrived, Daniel and Fiona were there, tuning their instruments for another practice session. They waved Mary and James over, beckoning them into the warm interior. Fiona, cradling her flute, immediately picked up on the excited vibe. "You two look like you've had a breakthrough." James explained the potential new sponsorship, while Mary expanded on the Braille description idea. Fiona's eyes lit up. "I love it. Some of my extended family members are visually impaired, and they rarely attend art exhibits because they feel left out." Daniel, tightening a string on his violin, frowned slightly. "That's wonderful news, but you should be cautious. Sometimes these foundations have strict requirements that don't align with the vision you have. Make sure you keep creative control." Mary nodded, appreciating his candor. "Absolutely. We can't compromise the essence of what we're trying to do. This isn't just a promotional stunt. It's a statement about accessibility and shared experiences." A sudden thought crossed her mind. "Daniel, Fiona, would you be willing to perform at this event? If we have a combination of James's piano pieces and your contributions, it could enrich the musical aspect, and it'd show the sponsor that we're offering a well-rounded program." Fiona grinned. "Count me in. I've never done anything like this before, but that's half the appeal." Daniel nodded in agreement. "I'm on board. Let's demonstrate the power of collaboration." With that confirmed, they rehearsed a few pieces together, testing acoustics and experimenting with transitions between different instruments. Mary captured candid shots of them. Daniel's focused gaze as he bowed the violin, Fiona's quick, bright smile between notes, James's calm presence guiding the musical direction. These images, she realized, would tell a story of artists uniting for a bigger cause. Later, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Mary and James stepped outside the theater into the soft glow of streetlights. She peered at his profile, wondering if he sensed the same swirl of hope and trepidation she did. He seemed quieter than before, lost in thought. "You okay?" she asked, tucking her hands into her coat pockets against the chill. He offered a small smile. "I'm fine. Just reflecting on how this is the first project that feels like it truly merges who I am with what I do. Makes me realize how long I've waited to be seen as more than a piano player who happens to be blind. I want to do this right." Mary felt her heart tighten with empathy. She placed a hand on his arm. "We will, one step at a time." And in that moment, despite the swirling uncertainties about sponsorships, deadlines, and acceptance, Mary felt the confidence that comes from facing a test with unwavering resolve, a resolve strengthened by the mutual faith she and James shared in their emerging vision. Mary's apartment felt colder than usual that night, even though her thermostat was set to its normal level. She wondered if it was her own restlessness generating a chill rather than any actual drop in temperature. After hours of sifting through her finances, calculating the costs of printing, framing, and tactile materials, she realized she would need more capital to pull off the exhibit with the standard she envisioned. Anxious thoughts tumbled through her mind. She recalled George Evans's warning, the looming question of where the funds would come from if the foundation didn't fully commit. She also remembered her mother's text, as well as her father's gentle reminders about being practical and saving for the future. Unable to sleep, she texted Sarah, who immediately suggested a late-night video call. Within minutes, Mary was staring at her friend's face on the laptop screen, the two of them comforted by each other's presence despite the digital distance. Sarah, wearing pajamas and sipping tea, looked concerned. "Okay," Sarah said, setting down her mug. "You're talking a mile a minute about numbers, sponsors, and your parents. Calm down, babe. Which worry do you want to tackle first?" Mary ran a hand through her hair. "I'm not sure. Everything feels like it's happening at once. I'm determined to make this event work, but I'm terrified of letting James down if the funding falls through. And then there's my family, reminding me about financial security and how I'm not getting any younger." Sarah exhaled thoughtfully. "Your parents love you, but they come from a different mindset. They probably see your career as unstable, and now you're diving into an even riskier project. It might help to talk to them, let them know how meaningful this is. Sometimes families just need clarity." Mary nodded, acknowledging the truth in her friend's words. She didn't want to admit how much her parents' lingering doubts about her chosen career path still stung, even at age 39. To them, photography was an unpredictable livelihood. If she piled on a creative, inclusive endeavor that didn't promise a huge financial return, she feared they'd see it as yet another irresponsible move. "What about James?" Sarah continued. "Have you told him how all this is affecting you?" Mary shifted uncomfortably. "Not really. He has enough on his plate, pressure from sponsors, his own ambitions. I don't want to burden him with my anxieties." Sarah gave her a pointed look. "He's your partner in this. A true partner wants to share in your burdens, not just the triumphs. You'll have to decide if you trust him enough to open up." After ending the call, Mary tried to sleep, but found herself replaying Sarah's words. Eventually, she got up, pulled out a notepad, and began scribbling down her concerns. Writing them out had a calming effect, each scribble on the paper releasing a bit of tension from her mind. By the time her eyes grew heavy, she felt marginally steadier, though still unsettled by the complexities ahead. The next morning, she rose early to meet James at a local diner. The place smelled of fresh coffee and fried eggs, its walls adorned with posters advertising neighborhood concerts. James was already seated at a booth, cane propped beside him. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, but he greeted her with a gentle smile. "Everything okay?" he asked after they ordered. "You sound a bit off." Mary realized she could either maintain her composure or try to be genuine. Remembering Sarah's advice, she took a breath and said, "I'm worried about the finances for this project and about my family's reaction. Sometimes I feel like I'm juggling too many responsibilities." James set down his coffee cup, leaning forward. "Talk to me." "I'd rather know now if you're carrying stress around." His unwavering concern and the sincerity in his voice prompted Mary to let it all spill out. Her fear of not meeting the foundation's expectations, the sponsor's cold attitude, her parents' quiet disapproval, and her own insecurities about sustaining a creative career. James listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or offering a soft word of empathy. When she finished, a hush settled between them. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said softly. "I know what it's like to feel pulled in different directions, to want to make everyone proud while staying true to yourself. But you don't have to shoulder it alone. I'm here. We'll figure it out step by step." Mary felt her eyes grow damp but fought back tears. In that moment, she saw a reflection of her own struggle in him, the constant balancing act of artistic integrity and practical concerns. Though the question of whether they could ultimately pull off this endeavor remained unanswered. The sense of not being alone in the battle provided a small but vital comfort. Mary's studio buzzed with activity. Stacks of framed photos lined one wall, a few prototypes for tactile displays covered a table, and Daniel stood by the door, awkwardly holding a potted fern he had brought as a studio warming gift. Fiona sat on a high stool, carefully looking over Braille copies of Mary's photo descriptions. Even Sarah had stopped by, typing away on her laptop to finalize a marketing pitch for potential donors. James hovered near a table, running his hands over a sample raised print photo. The edges of the shapes were slightly elevated, designed to give a sense of outline to those who couldn't see the image in the traditional sense. He traced the lines with a thoughtful expression. "I can't tell yet if it's too subtle," he mused. "The details feel faint." Mary frowned. "I'll try a thicker outline next time. We're still experimenting." "At least this proves the concept is possible." The room felt electric with collaboration, but beneath the surface, everyone sensed the countdown. Their potential sponsor from the Arts Foundation was due to visit that afternoon for a thorough review. If the foundation deemed the project financially viable and socially relevant, they'd offer partial funding. If not, Mary and James would have to scale back drastically or abandon the event altogether. The tension grew heavier when the foundation representative, a poised woman named Elaine Morrison, arrived. She wore a sharp blazer and carried a clipboard, exuding an air of efficiency. After polite introductions, she walked around the studio, inspecting Mary's framed prints and flipping through the Braille texts with measured interest. Elaine paused to inspect the raised print prototype. "This is intriguing," she said, running her fingertips over the design. "How many of these do you plan to produce for the exhibit?" Mary swallowed. "Ideally, as many as we can afford, maybe 10 to 15. Each would come with an audio description recorded by James and me." Raising an eyebrow, Elaine jotted notes on her clipboard. "Audio descriptions as well? You're including multiple accessibility methods." James, sensing a hint of skepticism, chimed in gently. "The point is to ensure no one feels excluded. Some might prefer Braille, others might rely on audio. We want to cover different needs." Elaine nodded but didn't reveal her thoughts. She continued her inspection, occasionally asking pointed questions about attendance projections, marketing strategies, and cost breakdowns. Mary found herself gripping her camera so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She tried to answer calmly, but fear crept in with every question. When the tour ended, Elaine stood by the door, flipping through her notes. "I appreciate the thoroughness. This project shows promise, but it's also ambitious. I'll need to review this with the foundation board before making a decision. You'll hear from us soon." With that, she left, the click of her heels echoing down the hallway. The group let out a collective exhale. Sarah turned to Mary. "You did great." She was tough but professional. James nodded, his expression unreadable. "We've done our part. Now we wait." The uncertainty gnawed at Mary. Over the next few days, she tried to maintain a routine, juggling client photo sessions and event plans. Each time her phone rang, her heart would spike, hoping it was Elaine with good news. By the third evening, the tension became almost unbearable. She and James decided to meet at the theater after his rehearsal, just to distract themselves. They settled into a pair of seats in the front row, the rest of the auditorium dark and empty. James's cane rested against the armrest, and Mary clutched a notebook filled with half-formed ideas. The solitude gave them room to voice concerns they had kept at bay. "What if the board says no?" Mary asked quietly, her voice echoing softly in the vacant space. "We've built this idea up so much. I'm not sure if we can salvage it without their financial support." James leaned his head against the seat, face turned toward the stage. We'll adapt, maybe scale it down, find a smaller venue, or crowdfund. We might even talk to a local disability rights group for partial sponsorship. She nodded, feeling tears threaten. I'm just exhausted. I want this to be more than a dream, you know. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. I know, but isn't that the nature of big dreams? They push us until we think we can't go on, then demand we push further. His words comforted her, if only slightly. They lingered there, enveloped by the quiet of the theatre, both grappling with a future that felt alarmingly uncertain. In a moment of vulnerability, Mary rested her head on James's shoulder. She felt the gentle rise and fall of his breath, a subtle reminder that at least they were in this together, win or lose. The next morning brought a phone call that would change everything. Mary answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. On the other end, Elaine spoke in calm, measured tones that belied the enormity of her message. The foundation would not fund the full scope of their proposal. They believed the concept was innovative, but the projected cost was too high. As Mary jotted down the notes, her hand shook. The obstacle before them now felt like a towering wall, one they might not be able to scale. The call ended with Elaine expressing regret and offering a lukewarm parting hope for future collaborations. Mary stood in her studio, phone in hand, staring at the emptiness, desperately trying to figure out what to do next. Late afternoon sunlight bathed Mary's studio in a golden glow, a stark contrast to the storm of disappointment swirling inside. After the foundation's rejection, she and James had spent a tense few days brainstorming ways to salvage the event. Calls to other sponsors, pleas to local businesses, nothing had panned out with enough backing to cover the entire cost. Still, Mary refused to give up. On a chilly evening, she posted a heartfelt message on a crowdfunding platform, accompanied by snippets of her photographs and a short video of James playing the piano while she described her images. Within hours, a trickle of donations appeared. A few supportive comments mentioned the uniqueness of the project, praising their dedication to accessibility. Encouraged, Mary sent out more emails, hoping the story would catch on. Days passed in a blur of equal parts hope and despair. Then one morning, her inbox displayed a surprising message. A well-known arts blogger wanted to do a feature on her project. She had discovered Mary's crowdfunding page and was intrigued by the combination of music and tactile photography. In a rush of excitement, Mary arranged an interview. The piece went live a week later, titled Love Beyond Sight. A pianist and photographer bridge their worlds. It quickly circulated on social media, and to Mary's amazement, donations began to climb. The numbers weren't staggering, but enough to cover at least some of the tactile printing and a smaller venue fee. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers who resonated with the story chipped in. For the first time since the Foundation's rejection, Mary felt a spark of genuine optimism. She rushed to share the news with James, who was practicing at the theatre. When she arrived, Daniel, Fiona, and a few other musicians were already there, tuning their instruments. Mary found James off to the side, resting his hands lightly on the piano keys. The moment she approached, he turned toward her with a questioning tilt of his head. "You sound excited," he noted, picking up on her quickened footsteps. She practically beamed. "The crowdfunding is working, James. We still might not hit our original budget, but we have enough to secure a small gallery space. We can print some tactile photos, maybe not as many as planned, but enough to demonstrate the concept. And people are talking about our project online. We've had supportive messages from across the country." He inhaled sharply, his smile broadening. "That's incredible news. I was dreading another letdown. This means we can still put something together, even if it's not the grand event we originally pictured." Mary nodded, her heart pounding with renewed energy. "Exactly. We'll have to adapt. But that's okay. We've come too far to abandon this. Let's do a scaled-down version. Fewer prints, shorter performance, but still inclusive. It'll be proof of concept. And maybe next time we can go bigger. Daniel, overhearing, wandered over with his violin. You two look like you just struck gold. Care to fill us in? After Mary explained the latest developments, Daniel shrugged with a casual grin. Sounds like we're still in business. Count me in for the performance, however big or small. Fiona joined them as well, brandishing her flute. Me too. This project deserves to be seen or heard, she added with a playful wink, glancing at James. We're in this together. A gentle wave of relief washed over Mary as she realized how supportive this small community of musicians had become. They discussed the next steps. James would refine his set list to fit a more intimate venue, while Mary would focus on selecting the best images for tactile printing. They agreed to hold meetings at her studio to finalize the event details. Later that evening, after rehearsals ended, Mary and James parted ways. She stopped by her studio to check the crowdfunding page again, marveling at how many small donations had poured in. It was still a fraction of what they'd initially hoped for, but enough to keep the dream alive. She typed a heartfelt thank you update to the backers, explaining how their generosity had reignited the project. Before going to sleep, she found herself alone with her thoughts. The silent relief of the partial victory buoyed her spirits. They had survived a major setback, though not unscathed. Plans had changed, grand ambitions had been trimmed, and anxieties lingered. But a sense of purpose still burned bright. Curling up with a cup of tea on the couch, she replayed the interviews and the kind words of encouragement that had come from unexpected corners. She also thought about her parents, who had expressed guarded support once they realized Mary was truly determined. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe that sometimes a smaller stage could still hold a powerful story, and perhaps that was where the most genuine transformations happened. A brisk wind gusted through the streets as Mary crossed town to meet James at the newly reserved gallery space. She clutched a folder against her chest, stuffed with revised plans and a scaled-back budget. The building, a converted loft with high ceilings and exposed beams, was nestled between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. Its rustic charm matched the intimate nature of the event they were now forced to create. Inside, James stood in the cavernous main room, a cane in one hand and the other gently touching the brick wall. He wore a small smile, as if absorbing the room's acoustic possibilities. A staff member from the gallery hovered nearby, explaining how adjustable track lighting could be used to spotlight Mary's photographs. Though the room was smaller than the theater's lobby, Mary sensed it might be a better fit, cozier and more welcoming for an interactive experience. After thanking the staff member, Mary approached James. "So, what do you think?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the open space. He turned toward the sound of her voice. "It feels like a hidden gem. The acoustics aren't as grand as the theater's stage, but they have a warmth. If we position the piano near that corner, I think it'll carry well enough." Mary nodded, envisioning how the audience would flow through the exhibit, pausing at each tactile photo station before gathering for James's performance. "I can set up the photos around the perimeter so people can explore them up close. We'll need a small table for braille handouts and your audio descriptions." They spent the next hour walking, James following her soft verbal cues through the layout. Mary took rough measurements for frames and made notes about where to place the speakers. With each practical detail nailed down, her confidence grew. She remembered the sense of despair that threatened to swallow them after the foundation's rejection. Yet here they were, inching forward on a different path. As they exited the gallery, dusk had settled, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. They walked in companionable silence for a few blocks until they reached a quiet street corner. James tilted his head slightly. "I'd like to talk about something personal, if that's okay." Mary felt her heart skip. "Of course." He paused, leaning against a lamppost. "We've been so focused on the event, on proving ourselves, that I haven't really told you how much this means to me. It's not just a showcase of accessible art. It's also, well, it's a chance to show people that love and creativity don't hinge on seeing or not seeing." She rested a hand on his arm, a gentle reassurance. "I know. Believe me, I've been feeling something similar. This project has stretched me in ways I never imagined. It's helped me grow, not just as a photographer, but as a person." He exhaled softly, a small, relieved smile curving his lips. "Sometimes I worry I'm overshadowing your career goals. You've done so much work for this exhibit." Mary shook her head. "You're not overshadowing anything. You've revitalized my passion for photography. Before this, I was just going through the motions, shooting weddings and engagements without truly feeling. Now every shot has meaning, especially knowing I'll try to translate it for someone who can't see it in a conventional sense." A faint chill in the air made them both shiver, and Mary suggested heading to a nearby cafe for warmth. Over steaming cups of hot chocolate, they talked about everything from the next steps in setting up the exhibit to what the future might hold for their partnership. Their conversation flowed with an openness that revealed how closely their lives had become interwoven. When they finally said goodnight, Mary caught a glimpse of tension behind James's confident facade. She sensed he was anticipating not just the event, but also the scrutiny that would come with it. People doubting whether a visually impaired pianist could truly connect with a visual artist's work. His determination inspired her, yet also reminded her that their biggest test had yet to come. As Mary returned home, her phone buzzed with an email notification. George Evans, the theatre sponsor, had sent a terse message. It read, "Heard you're proceeding independently. If you want future theatre access, you'd best deliver a crowd. I'll be watching." The words sent a jolt of anger through her. Was that a threat? Or just another reminder that their every move was under scrutiny? Flopping onto her couch, Mary stared at the darkened ceiling, letting the day's events swirl in her mind. They were climbing towards something big, an inevitable confrontation between their vision and the skepticism of others. She recalled Candace's advice about letting fear motivate rather than paralyze. The event loomed on the horizon like a summit, and they would need every ounce of resolve, collaboration, and belief to reach it. Though she felt a pang of unease at George's message, she closed her eyes and clung to the knowledge that they weren't alone. They had Daniel, Fiona, Sarah, Candace, and each other. That bond, built on creativity and mutual respect, would be their greatest asset in the trials yet to come. The small gallery space hummed with anticipation. Over the past week, Mary and James had worked around the clock to prepare for the inclusive exhibit and performance, scheduling everything from final rehearsals to last-minute adjustments on the tactile prints. Now, on the evening before the public showing, the gallery glowed with soft lighting that fell gracefully over the framed photos. A modest platform had been set up in one corner to accommodate the piano, and rows of folding chairs formed a half circle around it. Mary circulated through the room, double-checking the braille descriptions taped neatly beside each photograph. She could almost feel the tension in the air, her own nerves and those of the volunteer helpers, each aware of the stakes. Though the crowdfunding had provided partial funds and a wave of community support, skepticism still lingered among certain influential voices in the arts scene. George Evans's thinly veiled threat about attendance numbers added an extra layer of pressure. In the corner, Candace Palmer, Mary's mentor scrutinized a large tactile piece that depicted James's hands hovering above piano keys. The raised outlines were subtle, but Candice ran her fingers across them thoughtfully. "You can feel the movement in this outline," she mused. "It's quite powerful, Mary." A proud warmth spread through Mary's chest, but she fought to keep her composure. "Thank you. I hope the visitors who need to touch the images will find it meaningful." "That depends a lot on how we guide them," Candice replied. "Don't forget the importance of your spoken descriptions or the short audio guide James recorded." Mary nodded, moving on to check the projector in the back corner, which would display slides for sighted guests who wanted more visual context. Across the room, she spotted James conversing with Fiona and Daniel. Their instruments stood nearby, ready for the rehearsal run. The group was huddled in low, intense conversation, likely discussing the final arrangement of the pieces they would play the next day. When Mary approached them, Daniel offered a respectful nod. "We're debating the order of the performance. Do you think we should open with a recognizable classical piece to capture attention, or go straight into James's original composition to showcase the unique aspect of the event?" James rested a hand on the piano bench, looking calm yet serious. "My composition was inspired by Mary's photography, so maybe it should come later, once the audience has experienced the photos. Let them explore the exhibit, then gather for that piece as a culmination." Fiona grinned, clearly thrilled at the idea. "That's perfect. It ties everything together in one thematic arc." Mary agreed, crossing out a portion of the old set list on her clipboard. "Done. Let's finalize that order and do a quick run-through." They settled into an informal rehearsal. Daniel's violin soared through a brief, haunting classical number. Fiona's flute danced in response, weaving a delicate harmony. James then took center stage at the piano, playing with careful precision at first, then letting the music flow more openly. Mary felt goosebumps rise along her arms. His ability to translate emotion into sound still amazed her. Even after witnessing him perform dozens of times, she couldn't shake the sense that something transcendent happened whenever he touched those keys. Midway through the rehearsal, the front door squeaked open. Heads turned to see George Evans stepping into the gallery, a neutral expression on his face. He offered a curt nod to Mary before strolling around, studying the photos with folded arms. His gaze flicked to the tactile prints, but revealed no reaction. After a few moments, he wandered toward the makeshift seating area, scanning the limited rows of chairs. When the music paused, Mary approached him, trying to maintain a polite tone. "Mr. Evans, I didn't realize you'd be dropping by today." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm curious to see what you've managed. Not many seats here, though. Sure you can draw a decent crowd?" Mary bristled, her throat tightening. "We have reservations from donors, community members, and local arts enthusiasts. It's not a large venue, but it suits our interactive concept." George shrugged. "I suppose time will tell. Just remember, the theater management will be watching the turnout even if you chose to go off-site. If attendance is poor, it doesn't bode well for future collaborations. You understand that, right?" James, sensing the tension in Mary's voice, came over and stood beside her. Though he didn't look directly at George, he addressed him with a calm confidence. "We're prepared, Mr. Evans. Thank you for your concern." George offered a dismissive nod and left without further comment. Mary released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. While she knew the sponsors' skepticism could affect their future prospects, she tried to quell the self-doubt bubbling up. They had come too far. This was their moment to prove what they could accomplish. As the evening wound down, the group parted ways to rest before the big day. Mary lingered, gazing at the silent piano under the spotlight. She couldn't help recalling how all this started with a few online messages exchanged between two strangers who loved art and music. Now they stood on the brink of a public test, overshadowed by doubts, but fortified by a shared vision. She switched off the gallery lights, locking the door behind her with a trembling hand. The final confrontation loomed, and she could only hope their passion would be enough to carry them through. The morning of the exhibit arrived with a pale sun struggling to break through clouds that threatened rain. Mary woke early, her stomach churning with nervous energy. Instead of heading straight to the gallery, she took a quick detour to the nearby florist, where she picked up a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her plan was to place them near the entrance as a subtle, welcoming gesture, a burst of color to greet visitors. When she reached the gallery, she found that James was already there, seated on the stage stool, running his fingers over the piano keys in a silent, meditative pattern. Fiona and Daniel busied themselves arranging the chairs into neat rows, and Candice stood in the back with Sarah, adjusting a banner that read, "Transcending Boundaries, a joint exploration of sound and sight." "Good morning," Mary greeted them, placing the wildflowers in a simple glass vase near the entrance. "Let's hope the weather cooperates and we don't get soaked arrivals." Sarah gave a half laugh. "Rain or shine, people who truly care about this will show up." "Don't worry," Mary nodded, appreciating her friend's optimism. She went to James, who wore a look of quiet concentration. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. He placed his hand on top of hers, drawing reassurance from her presence. "Just mentally preparing. This performance feels bigger than any I've done before because it's so personal. It's not just me up there, it's our collective project." "That's exactly how I feel," Mary murmured, her heart clenching with a tender mixture of pride and anxiety. Soon, the doors opened to the first batch of visitors. Some carried brochures or wore ID badges that indicated they were from local arts organizations. Others were Mary's photography clients or acquaintances who had come to support her. A few were from the visually impaired community, guided by friends or family members, clearly eager to explore the tactile elements. Mary circulated through the crowd, explaining the exhibit's concept to anyone who seemed interested. Occasionally, she snuck a glance at James, who was offering a warm welcome to each guest. Daniel and Fiona took turns chatting with newcomers, describing how they integrated music into the project. An hour passed in a blur of introductions, smiles, and inquisitive questions. People ran their fingertips along the raised prints, listened to Mary's recorded audio descriptions, and tested the braille texts. Some seemed awestruck by the newness of it all. Others offered constructive feedback on how the experience could be improved. Despite her mounting exhaustion, Mary felt a surge of hope each time someone expressed appreciation for the inclusivity. Then, amid the growing crowd, Mary spotted her parents entering the gallery. She hadn't been sure if they would make the trip from Florida, but here they were, appearing slightly overwhelmed by the bustle. Her father wore a reserved smile, while her mother's eyes darted around, taking in the exhibit's details. Mary rushed over to greet them, emotion tightening her throat. "I can't believe you two are actually here," she exclaimed, hugging them both. Her mother adjusted her purse, trying to maintain composure. "We wanted to see what you've been working on. You've sounded so passionate about this. We wanted to understand." Her father nodded, gently squeezing Mary's shoulder. "We're proud of you, kiddo. You've really put your heart into this." Before Mary could respond, she caught sight of George Evans standing near a corner, sipping a cup of coffee and surveying the crowd. He looked stoic, but the hint of a frown creased his brow. Feeling protective of her moment with her parents, Mary guided them to a quieter section of the gallery, where she showed them a few photographs and offered a condensed explanation of the tactile concept. They listened intently, and to her relief, they seemed genuinely impressed. When it came time for the musical performance, everyone settled into the rows of chairs. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation. Daniel and Fiona opened with a classical duet, the violin and flute weaving together in a delicate dance that drew appreciative murmurs from the audience. Then James took the stage. Silence fell, broken only by the whisper of the air conditioning and the soft shuffle of feet as people leaned forward. He began with a familiar piece by Debussy, one that drifted through the space like a gentle breeze. Mary observed the reaction of those in attendance, the slight tilt of heads, the rhythmic tapping of toes, the faces slack with rapt attention. Even George Evans, leaning against the back wall, appeared momentarily engrossed. After the classical segment, James paused. He cleared his throat, addressing the crowd. This next composition is something new. It was inspired by Mary's photographs. She'd describe each image to me, how the light and shadow interacted, the texture of a city street, the curve of a smile. I tried to capture the feeling those descriptions gave me in a piece I call Beyond the Frame. With that, he began to play. The melody started softly, each note measured, as if hesitant. Then came a swell, passionate chords surged like waves, meeting moments of quiet reflection. Mary, watching from the side, felt tears prick her eyes. It was as if James had transformed her photographs into music, giving them life in a way she never imagined. She spotted her parents exchanging a glance that bordered on awe. Across the aisle, Candace held a hand over her mouth, visibly moved. The piece ended on a lingering chord that slowly faded, leaving the room breathless. Then came applause, tentative at first, then swelling into a standing ovation from most of the audience. Mary felt an overwhelming urge to rush on stage, but she stayed back, letting James have his moment. The crowd surrounded him, praising his performance. Some turned to Mary's photographs afterward, eager to connect the music they'd just heard with the images on the walls. As people slowly dispersed, Mary found James near the piano, exhaustion and relief mingling on his face. They embraced, the mood around them filled with the hum of post-performance conversation. Though the event was not yet over, they both knew a significant hurdle had been cleared. In the background, her parents caught her eye, offering a small nod of acceptance. Even if challenges still lay ahead, Mary felt like they'd taken a crucial step toward healing old doubts and forging a new path together. When the final applause died down, guests mingled around the gallery, exchanging reflections on the exhibit. The energy in the room was celebratory yet thoughtful. Mary drifted through small clusters of people, answering questions about her technique or listening to their impressions. She couldn't stop smiling, adrenaline still coursing through her system after James's powerful performance. At one point, she turned to find James standing beside her parents. Her mother, who rarely displayed overt emotion, rested a hand on James's arm, her eyes glimmering with tears. "That was magnificent," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I never imagined music could capture something like a photograph, but you did it." James dipped his head in gratitude. "Thank you. Mary's descriptions were the real key. She painted the pictures in my head." Mary's father cleared his throat. "You both did something special here. We're proud you stuck to your vision, even when we had our doubts." His eyes sought Mary's. "Seems you found a calling that's bigger than just taking pictures for a living." Mary felt a knot of emotion lodge in her throat. For so long, she had sought her parents' affirmation, wrestling with the notion that her creative pursuits might never be deemed practical enough. Now, standing in a gallery buzzing with genuine admiration, she realized that her own self-approval meant just as much. Nevertheless, having her parents acknowledge her success was an unexpected gift. She excused herself to greet a small group of visually impaired guests who were waiting to share their thoughts. A young man in his 20s, cane in hand, spoke first. "Thank you for creating those raised outlines. It's the first time I've ever felt a photograph. It still doesn't replace sight, but it gives me a better idea of what's there. It's meaningful." Mary swallowed, deeply moved. "I'm glad. This is a learning process for all of us, and we want to keep improving." A woman with him, possibly an older relative, added, "Please don't stop. This kind of event is rare. Imagine if more exhibits did this. It would open up so many experiences." Mary assured them she planned to continue exploring inclusive methods in future projects. Their enthusiasm bolstered her own commitment to making art accessible. As she moved on, she noticed Candice chatting with a representative from a local arts magazine who seemed eager to cover the exhibit. Sarah hovered near the entrance, handing out additional flyers and collecting email addresses from visitors who wanted updates on upcoming shows. Finally, Mary took a breather in the side corridor, leaning against the cool, exposed brick. The day's events felt surreal, so many emotions wrapped into one. She closed her eyes, reflecting on how drastically her life had changed. A few months ago, she had hesitated even to respond to James's online messages, too guarded to risk another disappointment. Now, her photography had evolved into a powerful tool for communication, bridging gaps she never knew could be bridged. She sensed a presence beside her and opened her eyes to see James, his cane lightly tapping the floor for orientation. He placed a hand on the wall, then turned his face toward her. Hiding from the crowd, he teased gently. Mary smiled. "Just catching my breath. Today has been a whirlwind." He exhaled a quiet laugh. "Indeed, but a good whirlwind. I've never felt so understood." They fell into a comfortable silence, allowing the distant hum of conversation to fill the background. Mary studied James's profile, recalling how he had once spoken of wanting to be seen for his music rather than pitied for his lack of sight. In this moment, it felt like they had reached that place, if only for one shining day. Eventually, James broke the quiet. "So, what's next for us, Mary?" "This feels like the start of something, not the end." She considered his question, heart fluttering at the idea of a shared future. "I'm not entirely sure. I know I want to keep exploring inclusive photography. I'd love to travel, maybe document how people with different abilities experience art around the world." "And you?" He paused, fingers drumming softly against the brick. "I want to compose more. Performing other composers' pieces is beautiful, but creating my own music is freeing. Maybe we collaborate again, traveling to new places, you with your camera and me at any piano we can find." Mary felt a surge of excitement. The notion of weaving their passions together, forging projects that went beyond traditional boundaries, resonated. She reached out and grasped his hand. "I'd like that." For a moment, neither spoke. Then a voice called from the main room, Sarah, beckoning them to return and say a few words to the departing crowd. Mary glanced at James, who gave her a reassuring nod. As they made their way back into the gallery, Mary felt a calm certainty settling into her bones. The personal transformations she had undergone, the shift from a guarded observer of romance to an active participant in a deeply meaningful partnership, were no longer theoretical. They had taken root, shaping her outlook on love, work, and the very essence of seeing. By the next morning, the gallery was quiet again, emptied of visitors. The exhibit would remain for a few more days, but the opening night buzz had subsided. James arrived early, cane tapping the hardwood floors to help Mary retrieve some of the equipment they'd rented. With the performance and the big crowd behind them, a sense of both relief and lingering anticipation filled the air. They worked side by side, carefully coiling microphone cables and packing them into cases. The conversation flowed in a relaxed manner, touching on how each piece of equipment contributed to the event's success. Mary cracked a joke about how she'd nearly tripped on a cable in the middle of the show. James responded with a light chuckle, teasing her about wanting to add an element of physical comedy. Eventually, Mary paused, setting down a box of spare flyers. "James," she started softly, "the event went well, but I still wonder what George Evans will say. He lingered for a while after the performance, but I didn't get a chance to speak to him. Did you?" James's expression turned thoughtful. He approached me briefly at the end, congratulated me on the strong turnout. He was polite but non-committal. "I think he's waiting to see if the buzz continues beyond opening night. He dropped a hint that if we can keep audience interest high, the theatre might consider working with us again. But it wasn't exactly a promise." Mary nodded. "Then maybe we should strategize. If we show we can maintain public interest in inclusive art, it might persuade him and others who doubt us." Before James could reply, Candice stepped into the gallery, carrying a large folder under her arm. She greeted them warmly. "I didn't want to interrupt, but I have something to show you." She opened the folder, revealing a collection of high-resolution photographs from the event. Candid shots of James at the piano, guests feeling the raised prints, and group photos capturing the sense of unity. "I had a photographer friend of mine cover the exhibit," Candice explained. "I'd like to feature this in an upcoming issue of the magazine. It could be excellent publicity for both of you. People around the country are starting to talk about inclusive arts initiatives, and this could position you as pioneers." Mary's eyes danced over the images. She recognized the expressions of wonder on visitors' faces, the intense look of concentration on James, the proud stance of Daniel and Fiona with their instruments. The photographs felt both familiar and strangely new, as though she were witnessing the event from an outside perspective. "That's amazing, Candice. Thank you for thinking of us." Candice's gaze flicked to James. "I'll include some interviews too. Perhaps we can talk about your approach to composing for an exhibit like this. Articulate how your music was shaped by Mary's visual descriptions." James cocked his head, intrigued. "I'd be honored to share. The more we spread awareness, the better." They agreed on a timeline for the interview, and Candice left to finalize details with her editorial team. Alone once more, Mary and James stood amid the remnants of the exhibit, the successes and potential still fresh. She exhaled, placing a hand on the edge of a nearby table. "It feels like this is just the beginning, doesn't it?" James nodded. "We've proven we can merge our art forms. Now the question is how to sustain it, build on it, make it truly accessible for more people. The magazine feature could lead to greater opportunities or draw more critics." Mary found herself thinking about the doubters, about people like George Evans who saw risk in investing in unconventional art projects. Yet she also recalled the warmth of the audience, the donors who had backed them, and the potential for reaching those who'd never had a chance to experience art so personally. "One step at a time," she said, echoing a phrase she'd used before. She slid the last coil of cables into a tote bag, then turned to James. "We need a plan, maybe a follow-up event or a traveling exhibit. We can't let the momentum fade." He tapped his cane lightly, a methodical sound on the hardwood. "Agreed. We also need to figure out our personal next steps. This partnership is more than just professional, Mary." She felt her cheeks warm at the implied meaning. Over the past weeks, they had grown closer in a way that transcended creative collaboration. It was unspoken, but there, woven into every conversation and shared glance. Yet a part of her hesitated to label their relationship, fearing it might complicate the delicate balance of their personal and artistic worlds. For now, she simply offered him a soft smile. "I know. Let's keep talking, planning, seeing where this takes us. The opening night was a milestone. The rest of the journey is still unwritten, James nodded, returning her smile. They finished packing the equipment and locked up, each left with a blend of excitement, uncertainty, and hope. Outside, the day had brightened, the clouds giving way to a sunlit sky. It felt symbolic, as though an unseen hand was clearing their path toward a horizon they had yet to define. Several days later, Mary arrived at the gallery early to help take down the exhibit. A handful of visitors trickled in to see the photos for one last time, exchanging final words of praise or curiosity about what might come next. The event had stayed open longer than initially planned, thanks to a steady stream of interest. Though it hadn't attracted huge crowds every day, the engagement level of those who came had been profound. When James appeared, his cane tapping lightly on the floor, Mary couldn't help noticing how his posture seemed more confident than ever. He greeted the last few guests with a calm assurance, discussing the tactile prints as if he had been part of the visual world all his life. His knowledge of Mary's images and their emotional backstories clearly touched those who listened. Before they began dismantling frames, George Evans unexpectedly entered. Dressed in a well-tailored suit, he walked briskly across the space, pausing to observe the leftover promotional materials. Mary braced herself, uncertain whether his presence signaled trouble or opportunity. George gestured for Mary and James to join him near one of the photographs. Clearing his throat, he spoke in a low voice. "I wanted to see how things wrapped up. I must admit, the turnout exceeded my initial expectations. I heard positive chatter around town." James remained poised, while Mary's pulse quickened. "We're glad to hear that." George nodded slowly. "We've been in talks at the theatre. There's an opening in the schedule a few months from now. An off-peak period, but still a spot. We might consider showcasing a modified version of this exhibit, plus a performance, as a special feature. If you're interested, I can send over the proposed terms." A spark of triumph flared in Mary's chest. This was far from a guaranteed blockbuster event, but it signaled a shift in the theatre's stance. She glanced at James, whose face lit up with cautious excitement. "We'd definitely be interested," James said, voice steady. "We'll look at the terms, of course." George handed Mary a business card. "Contact me soon, and we'll sort out the details." "Good job on this, by the way." He offered a clipped nod, then turned and strode out. Mary and James stood in stunned silence for a moment. Daniel and Fiona, who had joined them for moral support, hurried over. "What was that about?" Fiona asked, curiosity written all over her face. Mary relayed the conversation, and Fiona let out a cheer. Daniel clapped James on the shoulder, a wide grin spreading across his features. "That's a big deal. You two actually changed his mind. Looks like your success here has made an impact." Relief flooded Mary, but it was tempered by an undercurrent of trepidation. The journey ahead was still uncertain, yet this invitation signaled that their hard work had not gone unnoticed. The group took a moment to celebrate the news, hugging one another and imagining what the future might hold. After Daniel and Fiona left, Mary and James began carefully unhooking frames from the walls. Each photo felt like a piece of their shared story, representing late-night editing, careful tactile enhancements, and heartfelt descriptions. When Mary took down the raised print photo of James at the piano, she paused, running her fingertips over the textured outlines. She marveled at how a single image had come to mean so much, bringing together her photography and his music in a way neither had anticipated. James sensed her stillness. "Thinking about the next step?" he asked quietly. She exhaled, setting the frame aside. "Yes, and about how far we've come. I remember the moment I discovered you were blind, how I panicked, unsure how our worlds could fit together. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine my art without you." He gave a soft, contemplative laugh. "You've changed me too." When I started conversing with you online, I never dreamed we'd collaborate like this, or that I'd create original compositions inspired by photography. You made me see, well, see, in my own way, that art transcends any single sense. They continued working, a quiet harmony settling between them. No grand speeches were necessary. The act of packing up each photograph, each tactile display, felt like gently tucking away a chapter of their ongoing narrative. Though the exhibit was coming down, the seed it planted was sure to grow in new directions. When they finished, Mary flicked off the gallery lights, and they stepped onto the sidewalk. The day was bright and inviting, the city thrumming with life. In her hand, Mary still clutched George's business card, a tangible sign of the next challenge that awaited them. A bigger stage, a more traditional venue, and an opportunity to further prove that love and art could flourish beyond conventional boundaries. They set off together, neither entirely certain of what lay ahead, but both confident in the connection they had forged. It was a new beginning, one that promised deeper rewards, fueled by the knowledge that their greatest challenges had led them to find the richest parts of themselves and each other. A few weeks after dismantling the gallery exhibit, Mary found herself back in her apartment, reviewing a pile of photos that spanned her entire career. Some were from early wedding shoots, others from the ambitious, inclusive exhibit with James. The lighting in her living room was soft, tinted with the late afternoon sun filtering through sheer curtains. A mug of tea steamed beside her laptop, and for the first time in months, she had a moment of stillness. She glanced around the familiar room. It felt different somehow, less like a place of solitary retreat and more like a haven of fresh possibilities. She remembered evenings spent here in quiet frustration, longing for meaningful connection. Now everything carried a new undertone of hope. The phone call from the theatre's sponsor, George Evans, offering them a performance slot lingered in her mind. They hadn't confirmed the details yet, but the invitation alone signaled a remarkable shift from skepticism to curiosity. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Finishing rehearsal soon. Can I swing by with dinner?" "I'd love to talk about the next steps." She smiled at the message, reflecting on how quickly he had become a consistent part of her daily life. He was more than a collaborator. He was a companion, someone who understood her art and stirred a sense of belonging she had rarely felt before. Mary cleared a space on the coffee table, stacking the photos neatly and tucking a few frames away. Not long after, the doorbell chimed. Opening the door, she found James standing there, cane in one hand and a paper bag in the other. The chilly breeze from the hallway brushed past him, ruffling his hair. He grinned, lifting the bag. "I hope you like chicken parmesan. The restaurant down the street had a special tonight." She ushered him in, taking the bag and setting it on the kitchen counter. "Sounds perfect. I'll grab some plates." While Mary laid out silverware, James navigated the apartment with comfortable familiarity, tapping the cane gently to avoid furniture. "I thought we could eat first," he said, "then talk about the theater show." They settled at her small dining table, the aroma of marinara sauce filling the air. As they ate, conversation flowed easily, touching on the day's mundane details, like Mary's latest photo editing session and James's piano tunings. It struck her how simple and ordinary the scene seemed, yet how much it contrasted with the loneliness she once felt in this very space. Now, the warmth of shared routine grounded them. Eventually, James dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. "So, about the theater invitation, I'm excited, but we need to be strategic. George Evans will want something new, something that builds on our exhibit yet fits a more traditional performance space." Mary poured herself another cup of tea. "I've been thinking about that. The theater isn't as intimate as the gallery, which means we can't have visitors touching raised print photos during the performance. We might need a separate foyer display, or even a small side room for a more tactile experience. James nodded. Exactly. Or perhaps we do a short session on stage before the performance, where I talk about the composition and you describe some of your images, so the audience, sighted or not, gets a sense of what's to come. Then the music would flow from that context. Mary liked the idea. She envisioned large projected images behind James while he played, and maybe an audio narration for guests who couldn't see the visuals. They jotted notes on a notepad, merging their artistic ambitions with logistical considerations. Despite the potential complexity, Mary's pulse quickened with excitement. The chance to refine their inclusive art in a bigger venue felt like a logical next chapter. When they finished dinner, Mary carried the empty plates to the sink. Over the gentle clatter of dishes, she spoke without turning around. "Remember how we worried that once the gallery show ended, we'd lose momentum? It's almost funny how things just keep unfolding." James let out a quiet laugh. "I think we discovered that once people see or hear something that resonates deeply, they want more. They crave that emotional bridge. It's not about novelty, it's about sincerity. And we've been genuine from the start." She nodded, setting down the last plate. "Sometimes it's still surreal. I mean, who would have thought my random post on a classical music forum would lead here?" He rose from the table, tapping his way into the living area. "I think about that all the time. How those first messages felt like seeds planted in the dark. We had no idea if they'd grow." They settled onto the sofa, the hum of city traffic outside providing a gentle backdrop. Mary wrapped a soft throw blanket around her shoulders. In the dim evening light, she could see James's reflection in the darkened TV screen, posture relaxed yet alert. She found herself marveling at how natural it felt to share these quiet moments. No forced conversation, no lingering awkwardness, just a mutual sense of calm. He reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. "No matter what comes next with the theater or any future projects, I hope we'll keep exploring. I don't just mean artistically. I mean exploring life together." Her chest tightened with a mix of joy and vulnerability. She squeezed his hand, letting the silence communicate what words might fumble. Beyond her window, headlights traced patterns on the wall, a fleeting display of lights in motion. For a moment, she remembered her old life, before James, before inclusive art, before she allowed her guard to fall. She realized that sometimes, returning to an ordinary world could be the greatest triumph, provided you carried the gifts of your journey back with you. The next week, Mary decided it was time to pay her parents a visit in Florida. They had attended the opening night of the exhibit, but she'd barely had a chance to talk with them at length in the midst of the crowd. Now that things had calmed down, she could take a short break before diving fully into the upcoming theater performance plans. She texted James from the airport lounge. "Boarding soon. I'll call you when I land. Wish me luck." He replied almost instantly with a playful, "Break a leg in the family spotlight." Hours later, Mary found herself stepping off the plane into the warm, humid air of Florida's Gulf Coast. A sense of nostalgia welled up as she collected her luggage and walked through the familiar terminal, remembering summers of childhood vacations and the last few years of sporadic visits. Outside, her mother waved energetically from the car, and her father honked the horn in greeting. Despite her initial apprehension, Mary's chest felt lighter seeing their smiles. The ride to her parents' modest retirement home breezed by with small talk about flight delays and local weather. Yet once they settled in the living room, a space decorated with family photos and seashell-themed throw pillows, her mother wasted no time diving deeper. "So," she said, pouring lemonade into glasses, "tell us about James. We only met him briefly at the exhibit, and we're curious about how things are going now that all the excitement has died down." Mary smiled, choosing her words with care. "We're still collaborating, but it's more than that. And we're seeing each other in a romantic sense too." Her father arched an eyebrow, fighting a grin. "We had an inkling. You two had that look people get when they're more than just co-workers." Mary's cheeks warmed. "He's an incredible pianist, but what matters more is who he is as a person. He's insightful, caring, and he's helped me see my work in a completely different light." "I'm happy, Dad." Her mother glanced at Mary's hand, as if checking for an engagement ring. Finding none, she cleared her throat. "And this new project at the theatre, will it be enough to keep you financially stable? You've always been talented, but I know how unpredictable the arts world can be." A small knot formed in Mary's stomach. She appreciated her parents' concern, but it still stung to hear their persistent doubts about her career. She took a measured breath. "It's a start, Mom. Plus, there's been talk of a magazine feature thanks to Candice. If it all goes well, it could open more doors. But I'm not just chasing money. This is about creating inclusive, meaningful art." Her mother pressed her lips together, then nodded slowly. "I respect that. Just don't forget to protect yourself. You're almost 40 after all, and life doesn't always give second chances." The implication hung in the air. Mary resisted the urge to snap back, reminding herself that her parents spoke from a place of generational caution. She changed the subject to lighter topics: the local farmers market, how her father's fishing club was doing, and the new neighbors who had moved in down the street. Over the next few days, she slipped into a gentle rhythm with her parents: morning walks around the neighborhood, afternoons spent reminiscing over old photo albums, and evenings cooking simple meals together. The tension about her future lingered in unspoken corners, but it no longer felt as pressing. Several times, her mother asked subtle questions about James, how he managed daily tasks without sight, what kind of childhood he'd had, whether his family supported his musical path. Mary answered openly, describing how James's parents had encouraged his talent from a young age and how he'd learned to navigate city life independently. On her last night in town, Mary sat on the back porch with her parents, sipping sweet tea as the sun set over a line of palm trees. The cicadas hummed a steady background chorus. Her father gazed at her thoughtfully. "You've changed," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "You used to avoid talking about emotions or your dreams. Now, you're different, more certain of what you want." Mary smiled, touched by his observation. "I learned a lot these past months. Working with James taught me that art can transcend limitations, and it also made me realize I can't keep living on the sidelines, photographing other people's happiness without pursuing my own." Her mother, eyes fixed on the purple-orange sky, reached out to place a hand over Mary's. "Well, we're proud of you. Even if we don't always say it the right way, we've always wanted you to chase joy, just as long as you're safe and supported." Mary's throat tightened. She squeezed her mother's hand, grateful for the fledgling acceptance. As dusk settled fully, she felt a sense of closure and renewal, as though she'd carried her experiences back to the place she grew up and found that both she and her parents had been gently transformed. When Mary returned to Chicago, she jumped straight into planning sessions with James, Daniel, and Fiona for the upcoming theater performance. The group met in Mary's studio, a space now partially transformed into a mini-lab for inclusive art experimentation. Prints of previous exhibitions covered one wall, and audio equipment for recording descriptive narrations lined a corner table. Sarah also joined them for a brainstorming meeting, taking copious notes on her tablet. The performance date was 6 weeks away, and they had a lot of ground to cover. They needed to figure out how to adapt the tactile and descriptive elements of the gallery show into a larger space without losing intimacy. As Mary explained her concept for a pre-show interactive corner in the theatre foyer, where visitors could touch smaller versions of the tactile prints and listen to short audio clips, Fiona clapped her hands in delight. That's a perfect way to let people familiarize themselves before the concert. And maybe we add a small discussion panel afterward for anyone who wants to learn more. James tilted his head thoughtfully. Yes, and I'd love to incorporate an improvised element during the performance. If Mary could display photos behind me while I play, I might vary the music in response to the images on the screen. Excitement buzzed around the room, but Mary sensed a note of practical caution in Daniel's voice. Let's not forget we have limited setup time at the theatre. We may only get a day or two to install everything and run a tech rehearsal. We should keep the plan manageable. Sarah tapped a note on her tablet. Right. Let's be sure we present it clearly to George Evans and the theatre team. We don't want any last-minute surprises that could jeopardize this opportunity. They spent the next few hours mapping out timelines and tasks, who would oversee the visuals, how the audio would be synchronized with James's music, where to place Braille signage. By the meeting's end, they had a workable plan that balanced creativity with logistical limits. As they wrapped up, James drifted over to a window where late afternoon light filtered through. Mary followed, drawn by his pensive expression. He offered her a half smile. This is so different from our gallery show. More public, more formal. I can't shake the feeling that we're stepping into a larger arena. Mary nodded. That's what I'm feeling too. But maybe that's good. The bigger the stage, the more people we can reach. And if it goes well, we might inspire other venues to consider accessibility from the start, not as an afterthought. James chuckled, a warm note escaping his lips. You've become quite the advocate. Remember when we first met, and you questioned whether we could even combine photography and piano in a meaningful way? A wave of nostalgia swept over her. I remember being so unsure of everything. You changed that. Working with you taught me that real art isn't limited by assumptions. It breaks them. They shared a brief moment of quiet understanding before gathering their belongings. Fiona and Daniel said their goodbyes, discussing the next rehearsal date as they left. Sarah lingered to finalize the meeting minutes, then waved cheerfully, leaving Mary and James alone in the studio's soft light. Strolling among the framed photos that chronicled Mary's journey, she paused at one particular print, an image of James seated at the piano, a reflective glow on his face. The caption Mary had written read, "Music is the light that shows the heart its path." James reached out, carefully resting his fingertips on the frame's edge. "You know," he said softly, "we've talked about sharing what we've learned with others, beyond just performances. I wonder if we could organize workshops or educational sessions for younger artists, especially those with visual impairments. Let them see they can collaborate with visual mediums in inventive ways." Mary's heart swelled at the idea. That's a brilliant thought. Candice might even help us publish a guide or a small booklet. We could include tips and personal anecdotes, maybe even combine it with an online resource. James smiled, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "I'd like us to create a legacy that lasts longer than a single show, something that encourages more people to embrace inclusive art forms." Her mind raced with possibilities, events at schools, partnerships with non-profit organizations, maybe even a traveling exhibit. The notion of leaving a lasting imprint, of paving the way for future generations to see art and music as boundless, tugged at her. She realized how far she had come, from the solitary photographer focusing on weddings and engagements. Now, she stood on the cusp of something that transcended personal ambitions, an opportunity to uplift an entire community of creators. As the evening light began to fade, Mary and James closed up the studio. They left with a sense that their work was evolving, no longer confined to a singular performance or exhibit, but blossoming into a broader mission. The next weeks would be filled with practical details, funding, marketing, scheduling, but the spark of inspiration they shared felt stronger than ever. It wasn't about personal glory. It was about opening the door for anyone who longed to express themselves, regardless of how they perceived the world. The day of the theatre performance arrived under crisp, clear skies. As Mary rode the elevator up to the backstage area, her nerves simmered just below the surface. She clutched a small tote containing backup camera batteries, a notebook of last-minute cues, and a carefully wrapped photograph, the one she considered her finest piece from the gallery exhibit. It showed James mid-performance, with a soft beam of light outlining his silhouette. Reaching the backstage corridor, she found a flurry of activity. Technicians adjusted lighting rigs and tested sound levels. Musicians chatted in hushed tones. Fiona polished her flute with a soft cloth, while Daniel tuned his violin in a corner. Large posters outside the auditorium announced the Inclusive Arts Showcase, featuring James Adams's piano compositions alongside Mary Williams's photography. Mary spotted James pacing near the wings, his cane folded up in one hand, wearing a sleek black outfit. He turned sharply when he sensed her approach, a mix of excitement and tension evident in his expression. "Everything set?" he asked, voice taut with anticipation. She took his free hand, offering a gentle squeeze. "Yes, the interactive station in the foyer is ready. We've set up smaller tactile prints, braille descriptions, and even a few headsets for audio narration." "People seem curious." He let out a slow breath. "Curiosity is good. It means they're open to what we're about to show them." Just then, George Evans appeared, dressed in a suit that looked a bit too stiff. He nodded in greeting, glancing at his watch. "We're expecting a decent turnout. You two ready?" Mary forced a polite smile, recalling how he once questioned the viability of their collaboration. "We're ready," she answered, steadying her voice. With that, George signaled for the house lights to dim. One by one, the small group of performers filed onto the stage. Mary hung back, camera in hand, ready to capture the moment. The auditorium, larger than the gallery, glowed with anticipation. She could sense the hush of the audience settling in, the weight of numerous eyes and ears focused on the stage. Fiona and Daniel opened with a brief piece, their instruments weaving a dreamy prelude. Then the lights shifted, revealing James seated at a grand piano in the center of the stage. He addressed the crowd with a calm yet resonant voice, explaining how his compositions drew from Mary's photographs and how they'd incorporated inclusive elements so that no one felt excluded. When the music began, Mary positioned herself near the side curtains, camera poised. She watched James's fingers glide over the piano keys, generating a melody that soared and dipped like a conversation between sound and silence. At times, projected images of her photographs illuminated the backdrop: city streets, tender portraits, textured landscapes, each accompanied by a soft audio description in the voice of either Mary or James, timed to flow with the music. Mary felt her throat constrict with emotion. The synergy of visuals and sound filled the space, and she noticed members of the audience leaning forward, captivated. Some closed their eyes as if to immerse themselves fully in the music. Others whispered to companions as the photos changed on the screen. The theater's prior doubts seemed to dissolve in the presence of this unified experience. Midway through the set, the composition transitioned into a section inspired by the tactile images Mary had developed. James spoke briefly about how she'd painstakingly created raised outlines so he could feel her photos, translating them into musical themes. An awed ripple spread through the crowd, followed by applause. Finally, the music reached its climax, a swelling of chords that seemed to hold the entire theater in suspense, then resolved into a soft, lingering cadence. The lights faded slowly, casting James in a gentle spotlight as the final note echoed off the walls. Silence reigned for a heartbeat, followed by a standing ovation that thundered through the auditorium. Mary felt tears prick her eyes. She snapped a few photos of the crowd, rising to its feet, then lowered her camera, overwhelmed by the moment. James stood, acknowledging the applause with a humble bow. From her vantage point, she could see George Evans in the balcony, leaning over the railing and clapping vigorously. Sarah and Candice beamed from seats nearby, and Mary's parents, whom she'd spotted earlier, were on their feet alongside the rest. When the curtain call ended, Mary stepped onto the stage for a final bow with James. He reached for her hand, and she guided him to center stage. The applause surged anew. In that rush of collective appreciation, Mary felt a profound sense of arrival. This was more than mere success. It was a testament to how art could bridge gaps that once seemed insurmountable, forging connections between sight and sound, fear and hope, isolation and unity. After the house lights came up, people filtered out into the foyer. Mary heard exclamations of wonder about the interactive station, overheard discussions about how the performance had opened people's eyes to new possibilities. She found James near the front row, receiving congratulations from enthusiastic patrons. As she reached him, he held out his hand. She took it, feeling the warmth of his presence, the steady anchor they had become for each other. Amid the bustle, James leaned close, his voice nearly lost in the hum of the crowd. "We did it, Mary," he whispered. "We really did." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Yes, we did, and I think this is just the beginning." They stood there in the glow of shared accomplishment, no dramatic fanfare needed, only the quiet certainty that they had changed each other's lives and, in some small measure, illuminated a broader path for others to follow. Their journey would continue, but for this moment, they savored a deep, unspoken contentment. The final chord had been played, yet its resonance lingered in the promise of what they would create next. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.